do we want to get into?
Really quickly, sure.
Well, okay, so in essence, this would be when you take an animal, a pig, say, and you would do a genetic edit so that it's not going to grow a kidney, and now you introduce human pluripotent cells, stem cells that would go into that open niche. You basically created an open niche,
Right,
like,
right.
and then the human cells are going to go in there and make a kidney. So you have a pig growing a literal human kidney. And the idea, going forward into the future of science fiction, everyone could have their own personal pig, like a car in the backyard for spare parts. Like you've got a pig that's growing a bunch of spare organs for you should you ever need one.
Welcome to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. What do frog skin, polyester hair, and pig kidneys have in common? They've all been used to try to replace our remarkably complex body parts. Science writer Mary Roach, best-selling author of Stiff and Fuzz, has been exploring humanity's relentless quest to recreate parts of the human anatomy and how astonishingly far we've come, as well as the difficult questions that arise as the science evolves. Her new book, coming out tomorrow, is called Replaceable You: Adventures in Human Anatomy. Mary Roach, welcome to Forum.
Thank you so much, Mina.
Your book is a great reminder that we have been on this medical journey of body part replacement for a long time, hundreds of years in the case of teeth. And I was wondering if you could talk about what you learned about early dentures and what they were like.
Oh, sure. Yeah, early dentures. You did not want to have a pair of early dentures. There were a number of technologies. One of the most gruesome, not used for a long time. This was 1800s France. It was called floating teeth, where there were actually piercings in the gum, and the uppers would be suspended from these wires through the gums. So that didn't last long. Around the George Washington era, we had uppers and lowers would be attached with a coil, like they were spring loaded. So you'd have the spring between the uppers and lowers kind of pushing the uppers, holding them in place. But the problem for George Washington, as he explained it, was that it also tended to push the denture out of the mouth. So when you look this for me, when I look at a dollar bill or when I look at George Washington portraits now, I kind of feel like you can see he's kind of trying to hold his dentures in place, like they're kind of coming out, and he had this kinda stiff, grim look, and now I understand what he was going through.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand what a lot of people in the Victorian era were going through because a lot of Victorians lack teeth. But what I
Yes.
was so struck by was that, you know, in the mid 20th century, people were choosing to pull out their healthy teeth. Why?
Yeah, that was amazing to me. I had heard somewhere this term matrimonial teeth, this notion that, when a bride got married, one of the bridal presents was to have all of her teeth pulled so that she could be fitted with dentures, then she would look beautiful for the photographs. Also, it would be cheaper because you have them all done at once, and then that's the end of it, which, of course, uh, isn't true. If you get dentures, the bone starts to resorb, you'd have to be refitted at a certain point, but anyway, and I thought, "Did this how frequently did this really happen?" And I came across this Reddit thread where somebody asked that very question, like, "Was it really true that this was a bridal present that you would have all your teeth pulled, like 40s, 50s, 60s?" And 1,000 people had answered saying, "Yeah, my grandma, my grandfather, my dad had this done." There was a reference to an interview. Terry Gross on Fresh Air had spoken to Paul McCartney, who said, "Yeah, my dad said when I turned 21, you ought to go in, have them all pulled, get some dentures." And I actually found that interview. That is in fact true. It was a thing. It was a fad. It was what you did. That's the way people explained it in their responses to this question. Like, no, it was just all the rage. And I felt so bad for these people because at that time, I mean, nowadays, you can have dental plates actually that click into some implants that are screwed into the bone, and so they do stay put, and they do allow you to chew. But the dentures in that era, they were poly-gripped in place, then they'd slip and slide, people were embarrassed, they didn't feel comfortable kissing or laughing, and it wasn't a good replacement at all, and it was kind of amazing the number of people that decided to do that.
Yeah, you mused whether they were succumbing to the lure of progress, I think was the way that you had put it.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed to me that there is this kind of, kind of delightful, hopeful attitude that people have that something new that's invented and it's science and it's going to be better, and often it is, but it's rarely as good as what you have. I mean, he my dad was I was gonna say my dad's British, and that's that horrible that dental stereotype. Okay, it doesn't matter that he was British, he was raised here. He came over here as a teenager, so anyway, my dad lost all his molars. He was 65 when I was born, so I always knew him
Oh.
as this guy who chewed with his front teeth. He never wanted to get dentures, he didn't wanna get the remaining teeth, he had all of his, his front his incisors, all in place, so he kinda like my brother would use the verb, he kinda beavered his food. But I now look back and I think, "Well, you were smart because, you I'd see him eat there was nothing that man couldn't eat, and he didn't have to worry about his dentures slipping or smelling or any of the things that those old style dentures used to do."
Yeah, we actually already have a listener comment about how this story is resonating with them. The listener writes, my grandmother in Greece had all her teeth removed when she was in her 40s on advice that it would help with her headaches. It didn't, and my father tells me she was deeply sad about it until the end of her life. He said her original teeth were beautiful. Let me invite more listeners to join the conversation. Have you ever had a body part replaced? Hip joints, dental implants, a new organ, maybe. What questions do you have about how far along we are with body part replacement? And have you ever struggled with a decision to replace a body part and why? You can tell us by emailing forum@kqed.org, finding us on our social channels, Discord, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at KQED Forum, or by calling 866-733-6786. Again, that's 866-733-6786. I loved also the detail that you added that, around, the mid 20th century was when the $6 million man came out. This idea, right, that like he was going to be stronger, better, and faster, as a result of replacing his parts into something that science came up with.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. I saw that show, and yeah, you'd see him on the treadmill running, and he had the bionic eye, and I think it would beep when he kinda queued it up, and I'm like, "That's an annoying feature. You didn't need to have it beep."
Exactly why we have learned that often the artificial part does not function as well as the original. And I'm reminded, Mary, of a conversation you had with a surgeon named Jeremy Government who told you that he really didn't think we can replace the human body, right? Because it is so
Yeah.
miraculous in its complexity and architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've come such a long way in replacing parts that are failing, that are broken, that are missing. But when it comes to matching what we started out with, I don't think we're there yet. I tried to find, is there any part of the human that we can do that with? And I thought, well, okay, let's get really simple. And I thought, okay, tears, artificial tears, they're pretty good, right? And I found this, I looked on the internet, Tear Lab. And I thought, "Ah, there's gonna be a lab when there's, like, bringing people in and showing them sad movies and making them cry, and there's gonna be a big statue of an eye or a tear out front." I had this whole, vision of what I was gonna experience. In fact, it's just a tabletop device for, uh, quantifying dry eye, but the guy who invented it knows a lot about tears, and I'm like, "Okay, help me here. We've got a replacement for tears, right?" Okay, so we talked for 2 of the free Zoom cycles because 'cause I'm too cheap to pay, right? So,
So
was it
like 90
45 minutes?
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so 45 I'm like, "Okay, wait, gotta start again. I'll call you right back." But for it's in other words, an hour and a half just talking about specifically not the tears that you cry, but the tear film that protects the eye, that keeps it lubricated, and keeps dangerous things from becoming dangerous infections. The tear film, it's got this structure, this kind of brush-like, almost a scaffold holding the various layers in place so that there's to prevent the evaporation, there's mucins, which are kinda collecting the debris and, like, parking it in the corner of the eye, so that kinda sleep snot that you wake up and hear, that stuff is like you can thank mucin. Lubricin is this amazing lubricating fluid, and I'm like, "Okay, alright, get it, I get it." We have not figured out how to replace the human tear film.
Yeah.
Not
I
even
love
that.
when you were like, salt water with a layer of oil to keep from the how hard could that be? Apparently.
Exactly, exactly. And then I said, "Well, so those products that are out there," he goes, "Well, some of those will work for an hour or 2, but kind of in a way, they're washing away some of that good stuff." Like,
Yeah.
"Ay, ay, ay, nothing is simple."
Yeah, but I think you were also alluding to this too. While it is pretty impossible to replace the human body, in all of its complexity, it really is worth giving it a try for all the ways that we have found it can help people. And you were getting to this, but I'm also wondering if you could just remind us, some of the problems that we have done a pretty good job of trying to solve by replacing body parts that are really life changing
Sure.
for people.
Well, yeah, if you look at, cataract surgery, we are now, pe I just a friend of mine just had both eyes done at once. I mean, it's become so reliable, safe, fast, um, effective that it's kind of a you do it in an afternoon, and then you're seeing things in this amazing new way that same day. But that began, thousands of years ago. What was done, because the cataract is just it is the lens itself which has become clouded, and at the end point just isn't letting light through at all. So what used to be done, it's the most common form of, preventable blindness. What used to be done back in the day, no anesthesia, just sharp stick into the eye, uh, kind of piercing the lens and pushing it down to the bottom of the eye, and this is a quote from, like, a 12th century medical manual. You would hold it down for 4 or 5 paternosters, our fathers, which seemed to me an appropriate thing to be, using to count the time. So you would just, like, hold it down out of the way, and now the light could come in. And even though things were not focused, at least you could see colors and shapes, and probably could I mean, I'm really nearsighted, they probably ended up kinda like me. Um, but I mean, it's the shape the lens itself provides about a third of the focusing ability. It's
Wow.
the shape of the eye itself, and so they still had that. So patients would be able to see. It's just, there's a lot of infection and, other bad things happening from the stick going in the eye.
We're talking about the quest to recreate and replace our human anatomy with Mary Roach. More after the break. I'm Mina Kim. Welcome back to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. From prosthetic limbs to printable organs, we're talking about the history, science, and complexities of human body part replacement with Mary Roach, whose latest book is Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy. And you might know her from her previous books, including Grunt, Stiff, Bonk, and Fuzz. And you, our listeners, are joining the conversation. Have you ever had a body part replaced? A hip joint, a dental implant, a new organ? How does the replacement compare to the original? And what questions do you have about how far along we are with body part replacement? You can tell us by calling 866 733 6786, 866 733 6786, by finding us on Discord, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, or Threads at KQED Forum, or by emailing forum@kqed.org. Maybe you've struggled with the decision to replace a body part as well. You can tell us why. Let me go to caller Vincent in Sacramento. Hi, Vincent, you're on.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you for taking my call. So, yeah, I had total shoulder replacement surgery exactly 2 months ago today.
Oh, wow.
So I have a brand new shoulder. Originally, it was about 40 years ago when I was a paratrooper in Alaska. I dislocated it, and it kept dislocating. So they did a surgery way back then where they just filled it in so it wouldn't pop out. And then 40 years in the future, it started getting really bad and hurting, and they said I was a good candidate for total shoulder replacement. And I'd never looked at it on YouTube or anything, but the doctor explained what he did. And then I looked at it afterwards, and it was absolutely gnarly and horrifying. But it's been 2 months, and it's working out really good. I'm going through physical therapy, and yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that it's working out so well for you, Vincent. Mary, this is making me think about, we were talking about a lot of the ways that some of the replacements that we've come up with haven't been great, but it was really interesting when you were talking about, body parts that we've been able to replace successfully, and also the realm of prosthetics, that it's possible to really entertain the question of, whether or not something has gotten so advanced that people should choose them
Yeah.
over their own limbs.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that story, Vincent. That's amazing. I think a shoulder replacement, I didn't cover this in the book, but were you actually sitting up to have it done?
Oh, I
Oh,
think
he's gone.
Vincent.
Okay.
Travis Air Force Base.
Oh, there he is.
And they had.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, They did it over at Travis Air Force Base, and they had me sitting up.
Yeah.
And and then I went under, and I think it took about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to do the whole surgery. And then
Yeah.
I came back to the post-op operation about a week later, and they explained what they did, and I looked it up online and watched it on YouTube, and it was,
Yeah.
but and it's supposed to be good for like another 10 years. But one thing I wanted to bring up was I did have problems deciding to do it. I've had a lot of surgeries in 64 years, and I really didn't want to go through the surgery, but I was waking up in the middle of the night with really bad arthritis.
Yeah.
And they said they dug a bunch of arthritis out too. So I'm glad I did it, but and it's supposed to be good for like another 10 years or so.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds right. It is gnarly. I will say I spent time in an operating room uh, where I think it was 10 operations, 5 hips in one OR and 5 knees in the other, the surgeon crossing back and forth. It was amazing, how quickly and the operations, the cut time was like, which is from skin open to skin closed, is about an hour. So it's gotten I mean, a shoulder is a little more complicated, and I was talking to the anesthesiologist, and he said at one point, because we do an epidural, a shot to, at the base of the spine to kind of numb the area, he said, "This could be you could be awake," and we've had patients request that to be awake. He said, "But there's a lot of sawing and hammering sounds that you probably don't want to hear," and I can confirm that is to me, that was the gnarliest. I mean, I couldn't
Yeah.
really see that well into the incision, but I could hear it all, and it is a my husband works in the wood shop with power tools, and I know these sounds, and those are there's it's a electric saw, and there's, something called a reamer, and then there's the surgical mallet, which you think, "Oh, it's gonna be really high tech." No, it's a mallet going it sounds like you're putting in a tent stake, and that's to stick the implant, for the hip replacement down into the femur to hammer it down in. So, it's an amazing procedure, and it's come such a long way, but yeah, it still sounds like, you're working on a car in the garage.
Yeah, your description of that was so funny. Yeah, so that's joint replacement. You also told the story of Judy, who basically does elective amputation, right? She
Yep,
chooses to have her foot amputated. And while, the joint replacements are more commonplace, it sounded like she had a really hard time getting a surgeon
yep,
who'd be willing to do the foot amputation. Can you just tell us Judy's
sure.
story, actually? And then, yeah.
Yeah, Judy was, one of my conversation with her is one of the things that steered me down this path for this book. She had written to me she's a reader, and she'd written to me and said, "I think for your next book, you should write about professional football referees," and, that, didn't resonate with me quite as well as it might because I don't watch football. But anyway, we corresponded, and she happened to mention that she was an amputee. Specifically, she said, an elective amputee, and that's a person who didn't have to have the foot removed, the lower leg removed, because it was it was healthy, it had a blood supply. She could walk on it, but she couldn't walk well. She'd had spina bifida, there'd been, issues with her spinal cord that had sort of affected the way her foot was essentially twisted. She couldn't run, she couldn't hike the way she just couldn't move the way she wanted to, and she would see people hiking, running, jogging, whatever, just going about their lives with a lower limb prosthetic, and she said, "Well, why?" She's like, "Why can't I have that? Your hip wears out, you get a hip replacement. Why can't I have this?" And she contacted quite a few surgeons, over the years who wouldn't do it. And there's a number of reasons why surgeons, might be hesitant to do that. She said they kept saying to me, "It's a healthy foot." And she'd say, "Yeah, but I can't walk on it." And eventually she did find someone to amputate, and she was much happier. But it was interesting, we have this kind of bias for wholeness in a way, and I mean, there's various reasons why a surgeon, maybe liability, what if there were phantom pain? How
Yeah.
do you get insurance to cover it? There definitely are reasons why a surgeon or just I don't do a lot of amputations and I'm not comfortable with it. Plenty of reasons why the surgeons may have been saying no, but there is this kind of desire to like, well, maybe one more surgery. Maybe we can fix it. Maybe we can get you back to where you were. And behind that, I think, is this kind of like sense of like, it's better to be a whole, don't remove something that you can't put back, and she knew that that wasn't the case, but I think she was working against that kind of bias too.
Yeah. And you talked with people, I think it was Ezra Freck was one of them, about
Yes.
how that bias could operate in the sense of, okay, just because I have a prosthetic, I'm not whole kind of feeling, you know?
Yeah, even the word I mean, Ezra Freck is for people who are not familiar with him, he's a Paralympian, and in the last Paralympics, he won gold in a high jump and another event that I'm now forgetting, but he's a tremendous athlete. Look him up on TikTok or YouTube, but I didn't know who he was. I was at the annual convention of the Amputee Coalition, and I was speaking with his father who helps people get back into athletics after an amputation. And he came up, Ezra came up, and, we were chatting, and he has, had an amputation mid-thigh, a surgery on he was born with various disabilities, various malformed limbs, and I said to him, "Oh, can you run?" Like, I had just looked at him because he had this, above the knee amputation, I just assumed that he was seriously disabled. Well, compare me to Ezra Freck, I'm the disabled person. I mean, like, you look at what he can do, how he can run, how he can jump, he's an unbelievable athlete, but so the word disabled it's a funny thing, I'm very, very nearsighted, I'm legally blind without my contacts, so if I didn't have my contacts, I'd be disabled, but yeah, and he took it so well, he's like, "Can I run?" "I can run, yes." You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm sure
can.
you're used to it. Actually, do you just want to take a second to talk about how far we have come with prosthetics? I was pretty amazed at just how advanced some feet prosthetics are now in reading Judy's story.
Yeah, yeah, very much, there are now, particularly for, lower limb amputations, there are microprocessors and, um, t little that, sort of hidden not hidden, but they're built in kinda looks like you have a very like a metal calf muscle kind of they look kind of cool, and they sense when you're about to fall, and they help prevent that. There's, it that they're the other advancement that's getting a lot of attention is called osseointegration, and that's a process whereby the prosthetic, instead of you having a socket that compresses your residual limb, it would screw into the bone, similar to a dental implant, and in fact, the person who pioneered osseointegration is the person who, pioneered dental implants. Um, and it's so much better when it works and when there's no infection, and the infection part of it is still something that needs to be worked out. But when it works, suddenly the person can sense, what kind of terrain they're walking on. Are they walking on, is it grass? Is it pavement? Are they stepping on someone's foot? As Freck always talked about, I'm always looking down to make sure I'm not standing on someone's foot. So there's this amazing feedback, and you're moving more the way you move with a natural limb. So that's exciting. That's a very exciting development. There have been issues depending. There's two different processes, and um, the the you're trying to get this. You've got this. It's a surgical procedure that not completely closed off. So bacteria can get in. If you look at
Mm.
like a deer with antlers, that if we could only if we could figure out how that works, um, because deer don't get infections, but there's a bone kind of protruding through the skin, and yet it doesn't get infected, but it does sometimes. The rates have been a little high, and that's, uh, that's been keeping people from Judy thought it. I mean, she has a friend who went through it in Australia and is still in a wheelchair because there's been a number of
Mm.
repetitive infections, but,
Mm.
for the people for whom it works, it's light years better for them.
How accessible are these kinds of body part replacements? I'm just thinking generally it must be very expensive, and I'm just wondering where healthcare is, where
Right,
insurance is
right,
on this.
right. I believe one of the Osseo integration companies did get approval, but it is a very expensive procedure. And at what point does insurance cover it? That's the other question. And for some of the upper limb, the arm prostheses that have the articulated fingers and the kind of bionic looking, um, very cyber looking limbs, those are very, very expensive, 10,000 and up, and insurance doesn't cover them. So that's 2 things working against them. Also, for people who've tried them, they're very heavy. They have to be charged. It's battery powered, and it can be uncomfortable, that much weight. So, I mean, I feel like it's just in its infancy, and,
Yes.
in decades to come, it will be a lot better. So, those are they look cool online, but sometimes, the mental energy to kind of because it's really you're sending an impulse the same way that you do now with a natural hand. It's this impulse to open and close, and it's seamless and instantaneous, but some of the limbs that are available now, you're kind of toggling through a menu of grips. I was at
Wow.
the Amputee Coalition with Judy, the woman that I mentioned earlier, and we walked by. There were very few of those products there. There was one where they showed a photograph of one of those bionic hands kind of holding a raspberry, which was, of course, that's a very delicate fruit, berry. And she looked over at it. She goes, "Yeah, are you gonna spend 20 seconds kind of manipulating the grip to the point where you want it, or are you gonna reach over with your other hand and pick it up and put it in your mouth?" So that's kind of where things are at. It's very exciting, and they're very cool, and like all of this, if you look at cataract surgery in the 1960s, you were in the hospital for days lying on your back with sandbags on either side of your head. It was a big incision, there were stitches. It was a big deal, but it was also exciting, and it was the birth of this technique that now, means people can have perfect, vision and, where before they were unable to drive at night, and so anyway, it's a long process. The first hip replacement was 1938, so these things, to get to the point where everybody's having it done, which is exciting. It takes a while to get there, and I think that these sorts of prosthetic limbs are getting there.
Yeah. We're talking about where we are with human body part replacement, where the science is, and also the kinds of interesting, difficult, unexpected questions that can come up as the science evolves. Anne writes, I'm a recipient of bilateral cochlear implants. They're pretty amazing. Everything sounds normal. I can no longer detect tones and semitones, though, so my music appreciation is sadly almost non existent. I have participated in several music and sound studies at UCSF, where researchers are trying to overcome one of the last challenges cochlear implants recipients face. Hopefully, there'll be a solution for me me at some point. I'm extremely grateful to those who went before me and had implants with only 2 channels. Today's implants have at least 22. Cochlear implants are one of modern medicine's miracles. And Cole writes, my mom had problems with her hip all her life and got it replaced in her 40s, which is rare. She had less pain and better mobility, but 8 years later, the hip was recalled like a faulty car part. They were leaching cobalt and chromium into patients' bloodstream, so she had to get a second replacement. Let me go to Caroline in Oakland. Hi, Caroline, you're on.
Hi. I'm also wondering about hip replacements. I don't know if it's still true, but people used to be told not to have hip replacements too soon, like in their 50s or 60s, because they'd have to be done over again. They didn't last for very long. And
Yes.
I think they're all titanium now. Is that expected to last longer?
Yeah,
Thanks,
you're
Caroline.
right. They would, there was this feeling that you didn't want, the hip you didn't want the person to outlive the hip, or there was you would you would you would wait till the person was, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, so that way you wouldn't need to put them through a second procedure, if that makes sense. So, yes, that was the case, but that not so much now. There were definitely issues with it was called metal on metal, the early metal on metal. So, you have it's a ball and socket replacement, and you have the cap and then the ball of the upper part of the femur, and when they're rubbing together over time, there were some wear debris, some little bits, tiny bits and pieces of metal that would cause this, um, inflammatory reaction, which caused, the joint would have to be the person would have to have the the implant removed and replaced, and that is much less common now. There are and
Yeah.
there are better metals being used. There are still metal on metal, but it's often a kind of it's like called high molecular weight polyethylene for the socket part of it, and then there's a really good friction between the 2, but the materials part of it has been tough to work out because of that. Either the ball was wearing out the socket, wearing that down and would need to be replaced, and also that the little bits of metal were, causing some horrible side effects.
Yeah. Actually, you're making me think of, so many examples of how the body can ultimately reject something, and I'm going to ask you more about that after the break. We're talking with Mary Roach. Stay with us. You're listening to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. We're talking about the science of replacement body parts, from hip replacements to prosthetic limbs to organs as well. Science writer Mary Roach, her latest book is Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy, and she's the best-selling author of Fuzz and Stiff. And listeners, have you ever had a body part replaced, like a hip joint or a dental implant or even a new organ? How does the replacement compare? Did you ever struggle with the decision to replace a body part? And what questions do you have about how far along we are with body part replacement? Jennifer writes, I had eye lens replacement surgery a couple years ago, and I'm very happy with the results. Colors are brighter, my astigmatism is gone, and I swear I can see from here to New Jersey amazingly fast and pain-free. The worst part was having to forego contacts for a month pre-surgery. Joel writes, my mother died of cancer, which started out in her bladder. She didn't have a great will to live with her bladder removed, and I can't blame her. Today, there are bladder replacements using a person's own intestine lining to form a new bladder. This is a tremendous advancement. Oh, Joel, thanks for telling us about her. So one of the things that we started out talking about were teeth and teeth replacement, which has a long history of trial and error. And then we were hearing, Caroline talking about what we learned about, metal on metal hip replacement. And now that they're titanium, they're expected to last longer. It really is such a process of learning. But one of the ones that I found so fascinating in your book, Mary, was what we've learned about skin grafting and skin replacement, because I was pretty shocked to learn just what different types of animal skin we tried for so long, like frog skin and even like tilapia fish.
Yeah, there, it was quite a menagerie of, the technical term is zoografting or xenografting, when you take another species' skin, and, yeah, I remember reading these, all these articles from the 1800s and early 1900s about, taking, skin from, like, the chicken, because the chicken, under the wing, you have that kind of that there's not a lot of fat there, it's just sort of that skin where at the kind of the joint there, and like that skin, frog skin became very popular. There were a lot of popular press stories about people becoming part frog, and I was like, "But wait a minute, did they really become part frog?" And I ended up spending time at, the Massachusetts General Hospital Sumner Redstone Burn Unit, and one of the questions I had was, "So why wouldn't we have the humans, why wouldn't they have rejected the pieces of chicken skin or frog skin? Did they
Yeah.
really become part frog?" And what the surgeon said, Jeremy Goverman, uh, he said, "One of the things that happens with a severe burn, a third-degree burn, is that the immune system is suppressed. The immune system is not doing its job." So, in fact, it was kind of the body was kind of accepting of whatever you put on. But, n you know, essentially all of these things, the chicken, the frog, nowadays, the cadaver skin, tilapia, that's a recent one, cod skin is used. They're essentially bio dressings in a way. They're
Uh,
protective, and they protect the wound as the person's healing, but eventually they slough off or they're pulled off, and, the person's own skin is used,
yeah.
because as the immune system gets back online, it doesn't want frog skin. It doesn't want
Yes.
it, yeah. So, so those techniques, while they seem kind of outlandish, cod skin is still used, but the question is, for especially for, like, a second-degree burn, which, heals fairly well on its own, those do we really need to be spending so much money on these kind of very, very fancy there's some that are, like, embryonic or they're umbilical or they're foreskin or there's all these kind of, skin substitutes that get a lot of attention, but depending on whom you speak to, just any kind of cadaver skin will work really well too, and it's mostly just protecting it. There's, things like Mepilex, which is an antibacterial kind of foam dressing, which also works really well. And the surgeon said to me, "Mepilex will cost you $10, cod skin will cost you 1,000."
Yeah.
So there are differing opinions on that, but a lot of Medicare dollars go toward those skin substitutes. Those things when depending on what kind of wound it is, does a second degree burn, you're probably fine with something a little less expensive. But it was an interesting era, certainly, to look through the medical journals and see all of I imagine because the guy who one the paper that I read was it was World War One. He was in France, and there was there was like as he put it, a lot of supply and demand for frogs in the region that he was in. I kind of imagine
Wow.
him, going in and going like, "Hey, chef, I can take those torsos off your hands." You know?
Yeah. Well, how have surgeons and specialists grappled with the challenge of, human body rejected animal tissue and organs when we are turning more to animals for our organs?
Yes, xenotransplantation, and we're not talking about skin here, but
No.
organs.
Yeah, organs.
Yeah, organs, kidneys and hearts, that's very exciting right now.
Yeah.
There's one, I mean, right now, the organs themselves they don't have FDA approval yet, but there's, eGenesis is starting a trial right now of I believe it's a kidney. A number of hearts and kidneys have from pigs, gene-edited pigs, have been transplanted into patients over the past, couple of years, and for a while, the results didn't look great because the patients would live about 2 months, generally speaking. But the thing to bear in mind is that those patients were very, very ill. The reason they were able to receive these, experimental organs is that they weren't going to live long, so it was a compassionate use exemption. That's why the FDA was like, "Okay, go ahead and try it,"
Hmm.
because there's no other solution. They're too far down the list. They're too sick to be getting a human organ. So those weren't ideal patients to look at how well does this work. There's a patient now, Tim Andrews, who I think it's 8 months he's had this, pig kidney, and he's doing well as far as I know, and the trials are underway, so that's exciting, and even if it only buys someone a year, that may be enough time for them to make their way up the waiting list and receive a human organ. So, it is exciting, and it is amazing because if you look at an unedited pig heart, say that, and you were to put it in someone, the body just goes crazy. The body, it's called a hyperacute rejection, and it just like attacks it, and it starts to turn black, and just it's destroyed because it's a very foreign. It's like the body's like, what the heck? Get that out of here. So, the edits have created a replacement you still need immunosuppression, but closer to what you would need if you received a human
Because you
organ.
can essentially put like human cells as part of the growth of the pig, of the organ in the pig. Am I understanding
Oh,
correctly?
well, the pig has been genetically
From
it's
the
a gene
beginning.
edit on the pig, so that they've knocked out there's this thing, the alpha-gal protein, which is a kind of like a red flag of otherness, that the body's like, "Whoa." So if you knock that out using CRISPR, using, gene
I
edits,
see.
if you get rid of that, then you're kind of fooling the body. It's like, "Oh, it's not that different,
I
move along.
see.
Not a big deal."
I think I
It's
might be
still a big
thinking
deal,
about
but not a huge deal.
your
Yeah.
chapter describing chimerism
Yes,
in
that's
a
a different
pig.
that's a
That's
different
different entirely.
that's a little sci-fi, but that is people are looking into that, and that is do we wanna get into
Really quickly, sure.
Well, okay, so in essence, this would be when you take, an animal, a pig, say, and you would do a genetic edit so that it's not gonna grow a kidney, and now you introduce human pluripotent cells, stem cells that would go into that open niche. You basically created an open niche,
Right,
like
right.
and then the human cells are gonna go in there and make a kidney. So you have a pig growing a literal human kidney. And the idea, going forward into the future of science fiction, everyone could have their own personal pig, like a car in the backyard for spare parts. Like you've got a pig that's growing a bunch of spare organs for you should you ever need one, which is very, very bizarre to think about. But apparently there is uh, a mouse that grew a rat kidney or vice versa. I can't
Right.
remember, it's in the book, but anyway, it's very much in the beginnings of research, and there's ethical issues because sometimes some of the cells aren't restricted just to that organ. They may if they end up in the brain and you have a pig that's developing a brain that's closer to a human, and now what are the moral consequences of that? And anyway, that's chimerism
Yeah.
in a very simplified it's beyond me. It's like, what's the line in The Big Lebowski? "You're out of your league, Donnie." It's a little
Uh,
out of my league, Mina.
well, this listener writes, no more bacon for me. Let me go to Penny in Corona. Hi, Penny. Join us.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I have an interesting situation. Our family, number one, has had multiple body replacements, but this one I haven't heard on your program yet today. When my son was 16, back in the early 2000s, he and his friend were skateboarding in the house. Anyway, he lost. He went elbow first through a glass table.
Oh, my gosh.
Completely severed. Yeah. He he's fine now, but he completely severed his ulnar nerve about an inch or two above his dominant hand elbow. He had that repaired and the nerve regenerated, and then he was sent to a plastic surgeon. Shout out to Dr. Kalina, wherever she's at. But she she harvested his own tendons from both of his arms and one of his legs and rebuilt his hand. There was like 33, 35 incisions in his hand where she removed all the old tendons. To be honest, I don't know, maybe she didn't do that, but she used the tendons that she harvested from his arms and legs to rebuild the use of that hand. And what was interesting is that he had to go to therapy. He was 16 years old at the time. It was the youngest person she had ever worked on. But they had to train his brain to reuse that hand because when they replaced everything, it was completely different than his other hand. But he did, and he went through therapy. It was very quick for him. It was completely successful, and he is in his 40s now. If I'm doing the math right, I'm bad with math. He's been an artist, an auto mechanic, an electrician. He modifies cars. He's a calligrapher. He does everything with that dominant
Wow.
hand. And what's interesting is that his brain, when he picks up a box, let's say, his left hand is doing one signal from his brain, and his right hand is doing a different signal from his brain, but it works fine. And to me, that's a miracle. I don't know how that works.
Oh, Penny, I'm so glad to hear that happened for him. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I should remind listeners, we're talking with Mary Roach about replaceable body parts. Her book is Replaceable You, and you are listening to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. And that's where everything is really moving, right, Mary? It's really, we've learned that really our own parts and using our own parts to try to create something is best, whether it be skin and I guess in Penny's case, tendons as well, right? It's really about regeneration.
Oh, yeah, if you can use your own, parts, that's an advantage, and I was impressed in writing this book with the kind of adaptability of the human body to, like, there's a procedure where if in cases of, cancer or as an alternative method with, transgender surgery, you can use you can use part of the intestine to create a vagina. And the intestine gets used, like someone mentioned earlier, an intestinal lining to make a bladder. The appendix has been recruited for various things. Um, and I'm just always impressed at the flexibility of the human body. You have this organ that evolved for digestion, and now you're asking it to take on a completely new role. And by and large, it's kind of like, okay, all right, I'll do my best. And it is amazing.
Yeah.
You can take I remember seeing, for a prior book, Grunt, I saw, a surgery where, to rebuild a urethra, a man's urethra who'd been injured in an IUD explosion, they took a little piece of the inside of the cheek, and they took that, and that would they rolled it up to make the urethra, and I said, "Well, why that particular tissue?" And they said, "Well, it's the inside of the mouth, so it's evolved to withstand moisture. It's used to being wet." So, as a urethra, they're like, "Let's try it." And so the adaptability of the body and also the creativity of surgeons to just say, "You know what? This might help someone. Let's try this. Let's take a little bit of cheek and let's roll it up and put it in. Hey, look at that, it works." That's an amazing thing.
It is. It's an incredible thing, and it's so interesting because in this process of showing just how far we've come in terms of learning and understanding um, how to replace or come up with effective replacements for body parts, which we've been hearing so many of our listeners share today, it's also just exposed how incredible our bodies are, right? Which is something that you really feel like is important for us to remember. Why so important for us to remember, Mary?
I've been writing about the human body on and off for years, and I'm always just amazed at, you go through life thinking of yourself kind of as a a mind, a person, but it's very much mind-based, and we lose sight of the fact that in the background all the time are a thousand amazing minuscule processes that are all working in harmony to enable us to go through life not thinking about our bodies, not we don't feel it, we don't know that it's going on, and so I think that makes us we kind of take it for granted, there's all this stuff that's going on, it's a miracle, really. That sounds cliché, but, we lose sight of that, And every time I do a book like this, I'm just gobsmacked by all of these processes and how well they work and how they enable us to, you'd like your human heart. You see that in a human heart in a chest. It's very active. You feel your heartbeat and you think, that's a little lub-dub thing. I don't know, whatever, kind of a subtle movement. But you see a heart and it is like squirming around in its little burrow there. And it does that, day in and day out for, 80, 90, 100 years without breaking, or mostly without breaking down. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, you got to see a heart like outside the body um, pulsing,
Yeah.
and that was incredible description. So, we just have 30 seconds left, but we've been talking about sort of the trajectory of these advancements, and I'm wondering if you're feeling like, how long will it be before we see some of the really incredible ones that people are doing, like this chimerism, like the 3D printing that people are attempting and so on. Like, do you feel like we are on an accelerated pace now, or do you think that these advances, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves? Like, these advances are going to take a long time.
Well, I think, things are in one sense happening lightning speed. Look at CRISPR, 2012, and already people are benefiting from gene therapy, and that's amazing. But just, keeping in mind the approval process, that's 10 years, $10 million. So it takes time. But
Yeah.
yes, it's happening fast.
Mary Roach, the book is Replaceable You. Thank you, and thank you, listeners. You've been listening to Forum. I'm Mina Kim.